I'm seeing doors close. I believe that's my signal. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming together, creating this community for this conversation today. We are going to be talking about writing the next chapter for DEIB. My name is Maurice Tuiasosopo Bell. I'm with Lattice. I lead the IDEA team, which is like a strategic SWAT team bringing together DEIB strategy with people analytics. Excited to have this conversation with you all. Before we begin, since we are in community, I'd love to know who's in the room. This one might be an easy one. How many of you all here today, and I'm talking to the virtual folks as well, imagine you are here in the physical form with us. How many folks here today are working in HR? Yeah, right? How many folks by chance are focused specifically on DEIB? All right. How many folks here are passionate about DEIB work? All right, so we're all here together. I'm excited and privileged to have the opportunity to bring together these great leaders to have this conversation with us. I will start with Regina Ross, Chief People Officer at Khan Academy. We've got Justin Phalichanh, Senior Vice President of Global Talent Development and Product Enablement at Kinesso. And we have Kelly Blackmon with BE Consulting, providing organizations DEI and change strategies to help foster more inclusive and high-performing work environments. Let's go. All right. So today, we're absolutely going to be future casting and thinking about DEIB and what's ahead. But I think it's important that as we think about where we're going, we take some time to think about where we've been. What I find to be fascinating in this moment is how, in some circles, DEIB has become a little bit of a four-letter word rather than literally being an acronym for four words. And so I think it's important as we start this conversation for us to talk about a little bit of its origins. And I would love to use this opportunity as a way to learn more about our panelists here. And so maybe, Kelly, for all of you, I'm curious, what was the first time that you learned about DEIB, or maybe it was DEI, or maybe it was DNI? Love to learn a little bit more about your first exposure to this work.
So I started off in a very business consulting world. 2019, I opened BE Consulting, and I was very much focused on the business aspects of culture and that sort of thing. And you all may have missed it, but then there was a pandemic worldwide. And you probably also missed this other piece where there was the murder of George Floyd, and there was this vacuum of leadership and everything cultural, of everything that was DEI. So I kind of, as a person who was very rooted in trying to make connection and build community, I was kind of sucked into that space. So it wasn't intentional. It just it called me.
Yeah, I would imagine for many of us that had the similar situation. Justin, how about you?
So for me, I actually started my career teaching at Middle Tennessee State University, their Global Studies program. And part of the program, faculty, students, staff, they're naturally really committed to DEI work, which is really amazing. Quite the contrast from corporate, but I actually made a conscious decision to move out of academia into corporate. And when I got to corporate, specifically my onboarding, as I was introduced to the company, I learned about all of the different resources we have, employee resources groups. And my company is a part of a holding company, and we have a chief diversity officer. We've had one for over 2 decades. The commitment that our organization has had to DEI really resonated with me because for myself, thinking about my own personal, professional experiences of what I looked for other folks who had similar interests in community groups. And once I saw that, what I saw then and what I still see today is that we as practitioners, HR professionals and leaders, we have the opportunity to really highlight all the different resources and opportunities for folks to get involved in this really deeply personal space.
So I'm going to date myself. This is back in the late 90s, actually mid 90s. I'm actually an engineer, and so my first job out of college was with the Global Manufacturing Organization, and I'm one of the very first Black female engineers in that organization. So I'm not just doing engineering, but I was tasked to go out and recruit more minority engineers. So there was a minority recruitment task force that I was on that evolved into a diversity advisory committee. So this was in the 90s where there was a focus on D&I. But let me tell you, I saw a disconnect between what we said we were doing at the task force level and then with senior leadership. So there is a emerging leadership program that I was in that company, and we were sitting around a round table with the CEO. And I raised my hand naively and asked the question, hey, why are there no women in executive leadership? And the response from the CEO was that, oh, women have just failed to rise to the occasion. Then I was trying to convince our HR vice president, hey, if we really want to be serious about recruiting more minorities, let's recruit from historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. And the response from that leader was, oh, the talent from HBCUs is going to be less qualified than the talent from majority universities. So it was a rude awakening for me at my first job out of college to see like there is things that we're saying we're doing to advance diversity and minority recruitment, but senior leadership felt that embracing diversity meant lowering their standards.
I think it speaks to a lot of the work that we've seen from the 90s to this point, where much of the effort and lift was just getting like unbreaking folks' mentality and the paradigms that we were rooted in how we think about talent, how we think about diversity, which is probably a good segue because, as you mentioned, Kelly, 2020 was a big moment. It was a seminal moment for DEIB work. Inspired by some of these really visible social and political movements around Black Lives Matter and Me Too movement. It really felt like DEIB had kind of had its moment. It was arriving in a way where we weren't trying to just build awareness or an understanding of the why, but folks were activated and wanting to take action. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe I'll start with you again, Kelly. You were starting a consultancy in this time, and you shared a little bit about that. I'd love to hear more about how you were experiencing the energy and the interest in the conversation and how you navigated that work.
So, because I have a background in psychology and in a background in emotional intelligence, what immediately struck me was that this was very, very, it was a hot topic, obviously, because we saw everything from social justice movements to people breaking stuff and right. Like there was a lot of emotion involved. So, what initially struck me was this idea that okay, yes, I have to step into a place where there seems to be a leadership gap or someone who's speaking the language that can mix with everyone. Uh, as a consultant, though, I was also supposed to pay the bills. So, what ended up becoming sort of my point of view is this idea of how do you build something that allows people to allows everyone to be heard. And what we saw a lot of right at the beginning of this latest form of DEI has been a lot of people saying, well, I'm angry and I'm justified, but there's still people who want to be active and people who want to join in. So I think what we saw was a lot of uh, people saying, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to try, and a lot of performative work to match that. So for me, it's always been very much, my work has been very much rooted in really being emotionally intelligent and really working with everyone. Because I do think when we hear inclusive in DEI or inclusivity, a lot of times we're saying inclusivity of marginalized communities, but not community. So that's, for me, that was kind of a starting point. And I did see that, honestly, just money wise, a competitive advantage because so much of DEI work was about we're reacting, we're angry, everyone's feeling guilty and sad. And what we're really talking about is a lack of representation for inclusivity across the board. So that's kind of where it kind of kicked off with me.
What about you as a HR leader, change leader? What was that moment like for you?
So I'm flashing back to 2020. I was working as a change management leader, and I remember going to work and pretending like everything was okay after George Floyd. And so I had a call with a colleague of mine. We became friends. She's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed German lady who's based in the UK. And we get on the Zoom call, and she's like, Regina, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm fine. And she says, no, Regina, how are you doing really? And she starts crying. So that gave me permission to cry and to express my real raw emotions, you know? And so people wanted to have the conversation, but I had to do the internal work myself because before I wasn't really ready to talk about this. I didn't want to face it. So I had to do some internal work. I engaged, I leaned into the conversations, vulnerable. I know that there were people who were asking for resources, like they were grappling, like, we've got to talk about this. How do my kids are asking me about, like, why is this happening? So there were no internal resources. I started curating those resources, helping the teams, and then facilitating conversations, courageous conversations, candid conversations, caring conversations about race, about racism, about the things that have happened. And so for me, this was the first time in my 20-year career that I stopped covering at work. And I started wearing my natural hair, right? Like all the things that I was doing, trying to just mask and fit in, I'm like, no more. And so that was liberating, but it was hard, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree in my personal experience as well. It was an awakening. And I think
Yeah.
individuals were seeing the world in a different way that they might not have naturally seen it themselves. And like that interest in that question in particular, like, how are you really doing? Like, I feel like in my career, that was the most I saw folks checking in that deeper way. Justin, from a learning standpoint, I would imagine too in that time, folks, they were craving more opportunities to better understand and deepen their understanding of work and practices. What was that like for you?
Yeah, thinking about our organization, we were all moved by the movement. We saw what was being covered in the media, in the news, on social media, and just having conversations with one another. Our employees, they actually looked to leadership and they wanted to understand what were we doing to support them. We as a leadership team recognized that there wasn't one solution, that there wasn't one specific thing that we could do. So we took many different approaches. We held safe spaces for specific communities, specific groups, and gave them the platform, the opportunity to share. On the other side of that, we also opened up those same spaces for the people to want to learn about said groups. And I think that really opened up a lot of conversation. As I think about us as individuals, and I'll even use myself, right? Those conversations, it wasn't necessarily to action on a call to action. Part of it was even just learning.
Yeah.
Just let me just come and just listen. Because I think in that moment of time, listening was really powerful. And it allowed us to be reflective and think about how am I processing this for myself so that I am aware of how I can show up to the best of my ability to learn, to understand. So for us as an organization, as people, we shared stories. We talk about how we've been affected by injustice and bias. And as we're able to share those stories, we're able to learn and just understand that these different perspectives really enrich our understanding and empathy and working with people.
Had an audience.
Yeah.
Um, so we're continuing along this journey, right? We're kind of thinking about the previous chapters before we get to the next chapter. There was a tipping point, and I think we all could agree, in 2022-ish, something shifted, right? And it felt like a very abrupt shift, right? I think probably stemmed from the macroeconomic environment, some of the political pressure at play, but many organizations were walking away, backtracking a little bit on their investment and or priority of DEIB work. How did you all navigate that shift? It felt very abrupt. It felt like, wait a minute, just a week ago, weren't we all about this? Right? So I'd love to hear a little bit, maybe Justin, if I can start with you, like how did you navigate that time, reposition, what decisions you'd have to make, what sacrifices, compromises were you faced with?
It was a tough time. And for us, we were affected by budget constraints. And I see folks nodding, and it was tough for us, right? We understood that budgets were cut, but it didn't stop the cause. We didn't retreat from our values. We knew that we still had a responsibility. And I think for all of us in this room, dialing in, we all have opportunities to be leaders. And our folks look to us to understand, how do we support the business and how do we respond in this moment of time, knowing that our diversity efforts or DEIB efforts can go in waves. I think another opportunity for us was that we also saw employees that they have ideas. They actually want to share. They want to talk about it. And even with budget constraints, if we allow our employees to share their ideas and give them the space to go, and that it doesn't have to just come from HR, that was a big movement that we saw to still stay committed, right? We know that times change, things evolve, but we stayed committed to the long-term vision, the strategy around supporting DEI work. So that was important for us.
Yeah, I think one of the things I found in a similar experience, we are quick to equate resource budget to priority.
Yep.
And I think there's power in decoupling that, right? And I think a lot of what we saw at Lattice was our workforce and our employees just wanted to make sure that our leadership gave a damn, right? They can wrap their heads around budget constraints. They understand that. They understand we're a business. But demonstrate to me and show me that you care. Show me that you're going to still create the forums and spaces for us to engage and learn. And even at a grassroots level, right? Folks really appreciated being enabled to live in their passions and the work that they cared about. Regina, what about you? How was it?
So it's interesting. 2022, I had been with Khan Academy for a few months. We were actually doubling down on our D&I efforts. So we had an external consultant, and so he had done the work from 2020 up until that point and had some recommendations. And so we actioned those recommendations, and the first thing was to hire an internal head of DEI. And so what I did was intentionally I added B, belonging, to the title because I felt it was more holistic approach. And I feel that that has served us well as things have transitioned and shifted in the landscape, because it is all about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So this person then developed a 5-year strategic DEIB plan that was linked to our people operations strategy, that was linked to our strategic priorities as a business. So it's not an island by itself. And then there's a lot of work that we've done. And so it may not have been like your typical D&I unconscious bias, but there's a lot of work we did on the Neuro Leadership Institute, inclusion, work on psychological safety, crucial conversations, like really about belonging, so that like when things were tipping down across the society, like we were still doing the work that we needed to do, because it's about foundational work. And one of the things in our DEIB strategic plan is ensuring there's alignment of our values and our behaviors. So that's the work. And when you have that, you have belonging, you have inclusion. So what have the results been? I was the first Black female manager ever hired at Khan Academy when I came on October 2021. And I'm proud to say I'm not the last. So there's been more people of color, more women of color. And this is really important for me, because when you look at the Women in the Workplace report by Lean In and McKinsey, the latest report is that there's that broken rung, of getting to manager for women. And for Black women in particular, 54 Black women are promoted to manager out of every 100 white men, right? And when you look at representation of Black females in the ranks of leadership, there is like 13% women of color at the manager level, and that decreases as you go up to senior levels down to a paltry 6%. So like the work for me is important, doing the work on inclusive collaboration, doing the work on hiring for cultural competence. And it's not just for Black women, but across the organization. Now there was a leader who came to me and said, hey, thank you for the work that you're doing, because I didn't realize I had a hiring bias. I was looking for a particular profile that fit what I wanted. Now I've opened the aperture, and now this person's team is a lot more diverse. So it's like doing the groundwork, changing people's mindsets about inclusion and belonging, and then you see the results.
That's right. That resonates a lot for me. I was also stepping into my leadership of DEIB towards the end of 2022. And one of the things that was really important for me was to say, hey, if we're gonna build this function, I also need people analytics. We didn't also have a formal people analytics function. And my vision, similar to yours, was like, I don't want DEIB to be this thing that's happening over here.
Yep.
How do we truly integrate it across everything we do within our people work and our people strategy? And for me, analytics was the way, right? Because I can actively look at our data and demonstrate group differences, right? And what was really powerful with that was it shifted this narrative from DEIB being this is going to sound rough, but like charity work, like, oh, we're doing this thing for other folks, to actually thinking about it from a talent strategy standpoint. How do we get the best out of our people? How do we bring the best out of our folks so they can do their best work in this time where we need to maximize our talent, right? With the resource restraints and things like that. That was really, really powerful for us. And I can share more about how we did that. But I want to get to you, Kelly, because you also, right? You were in this place where I'm sure business was booming in 2020 because folks were actively looking for consultation and strategy around DEIB. How did that change, and how did you approach it for 2022 and beyond?
First off, it's amazing that you all should know that we haven't put our answers together to mimic each other's. But so much of the stuff that you all have said is really where I had to put more focus. So, quick example: everyone has had to go through the dreaded implicit bias the training. And what typically happens is that we go to that training and we're going, well, okay, everyone has bias, so don't be upset about having bias, but you and you and you should all feel guilty about this bias, blah, blah, blah. For me, I started because of the fact that in the beginning, it was very much about, again, emotional intelligence, about safe spaces, about those sort of things, about those foundational pieces that you brought up. It was a very natural progression that as people started to pull back and they're like, well, do Black Lives Matter as much when this money starts to count? For me, it took an easy shift to say, this isn't just about Black lives. This is about everyone. So you go to that implicit bias training and you say, each one of you, and you can all do this really quickly, think about your background, think about your grandmother, think about what kind of bias he, she, they had to go through. What did they experience? And now, are you more connected with what bias looks like? Because 150 years ago, if you're an Italian American walking through the streets of New York, you may have been killed by an Irish American. You may have been looked down upon. The reality is that every single one of us, there's a bias against taller folks. There's a bias with being overweight. There's a bias for everything. Everyone knows this. And the reality is that what I decided to do was really shift more into, like, everyone gets the data, that diversity is great and that it helps, but operationalizing it really became my clear focus. So being able to say, how do I change my trainings? How do I change my workshops? How do I change my delivery to say, let's focus more into these foundational pieces and let's start building systems versus trying to do one-offs to really conquer a system of inequality that's been existing forever.
I think that I think, and this is probably a good. We have arrived now. Now we're at
Right, right,
2023, and what I think is interesting about that is we went through this whole pendulum swing, and I think with some of what I'm hearing you say, there were companies that were doing it because, quite frankly, it was a brand play, right? And it was something that sounded good, would attract talent, not necessarily like diverse talent, but just attract talent because it was trending. And I think for the companies that took that stance and approach, when the shift happened, they realized that there wasn't foundations, there wasn't substance there, right? So even if they wanted to stay with it, the work that they had done to underpin that focus wasn't there. And so here we are now. In Lattice's upcoming State of People strategy report, only 15% of our HR respondents said that DEIB programs are a priority. That's an all-time low for how long we've been running the survey, since 2020. 15.
50. Did you say 50?
No.
1-5.
15%. And so, I think we're having this conversation because we're talking about this next chapter, But that 15% is I think, a reflection of where we've been over the last year, 2 years. So now we're going to kind of move into, that was like the history, we're bringing it up. Now I want to just have an open conversation with you all, and I invite folks in the room as well. If you have thoughts, questions, want to take the conversation in a certain place, please feel free to do that. But here we are. What strategies are you all seeing or believe in or have vision around that can help us make sure that DEIB has its appropriate priority as a part of people strategy and talent strategy going forward?
Jump right on in.
There we go.
To kind of follow up on what I was mentioning, with the foundational work, it really does start with leadership. There's this belief, though, that if you give leaders a data point, that everything will cascade down and all the other employees will get it. What I found is that strategically, starting with leadership and having leadership model, not just okay or not just budget for it, but model the behaviors that you want to see in an organization, and then following that up with support. I'll tell you all, because of the fact that budgets became a lot tighter for DEI. What I was finding myself doing was, let's do very grassroots things. Y'all are not gonna believe this, but one of the highest engagements I got was doing a Slack channel or a Teams channel and just saying, hey, here's the daily dose of something good. And it would be cat memes. It would be morning jokes. There was no ask except to be a human being, which laid a foundation for about half of the organization to just jump in every so often. What we found was that we were able to have people who maybe were thinking about self-harm come in and talk about that. And we were able to kind of have their managers speak to that. We were able to have people who were maybe feeling frustrated at work. It became its own sort of feedback loop without having to spend 40 grand on having a third party come in. It was being innovative in those sort of ways that I saw that said, we can do this without as much money, but we also had to add this new thing, like our own humanity to it, and building a foundation of that, and honestly operationalizing what feels like the simplest thing. It should be the simplest thing in the world to us, being human beings, but it's been kind of normalized out of our work environments. So that's been my key strategy working towards this.
Yeah, that's powerful. It makes me think too about what you're talking about is culture, right?
Yep.
And I'm a believer that culture isn't something that you get to dictate or define. It's what exists, right? And it's
And everyone has
reflection
one.
of the things that are happening. And so even those types of behaviors that you're talking about, that's creating culture. And it's about, how this employee talks about this thing that happened, and they're like, oh, wasn't that cool that they said that mean, or I really enjoy this, right? That scaled is where culture happens.
Yep.
What I've observed too, when you're talking about leadership and making it a priority, you can't just, I think sometimes leaders fall into this space where they're saying, hey, this is a priority, so I'm going to tell everybody, hey, everyone, this is a priority. All right,
Yep.
I said it's a priority, so it's a priority, right? And I've seen more power when the stories kind of permeate across an organization where, hey, this leader really said some powerful things in this meeting, right? Like leaders talking to their leadership team, right? Behind closed doors saying, hey, I'm telling you all this is a priority and we need to invest here. That story gets out into the organization, right? And there's power behind that, right? It's what you say kind of on the surface versus what's being said behind the scenes. I've seen really strong power in facilitating that. As an HR leader, how are you thinking about the way forward and prioritizing DEIB?
Take you on a journey. All right. I envision like a culture that Kelly talked about, where instead of society affecting the workplace culture, we actually affect society. I envision us building such a like a DEI safe haven in our workplaces. So I'm thinking back to like 2020 when we were coming into work, we were having these conversations, we were like taking the resources that we got from work and taking it back to our homes and to our neighborhoods and to our communities, and we were calling people in to those conversations. So we weren't just winking at racist comments or sexist comments and just kind of going along with it in our families, but we were like, no, this is not right. So here's what I envision. This African Zulu term, sawubona, who's heard of that? Anybody? Okay. Yes, yes. So I see you, I value you, I appreciate you, and you greet me back because you see me. It's like seeing each other, like really, for real, for real. Seeing each other, and it's not being like blind where we don't see each other's differences. No, you see my differences, you value my differences. And so this is like the vision that I have. How can we create these authentic DEI safe havens where, like Sawubona, where we see each other, and it's so compelling that what we create at work, people are taking it home. People are taking it, to their communities, to their schools, and we are shifting the society instead of allowing society to shift us. But I'm realistic. I am a change practitioner. So let's do an exercise. All right. So stick out a foot if you can. Stick out a foot. All right, and just start rotating your foot that way. That's clockwise, right? Rotate your foot clockwise. Okay.
Good stretch.
All right. Now, in the air with the finger, draw the number 6. What happened?
Oh.
What happened?
Come on.
Right?
Try that again.
Okay, try it again. Rotate your foot clockwise, and then in the air, draw the number. Oh, shoot. Okay, so that's just showing like change, because when we're leaning into DEIB, when we're leaning into these new behaviors, that's what we're doing, twirling our foot. But then something happens, and we are distracted by, and so we end up reverting back to what we know. So how do we like implement that stickiness? Like we really train our foot. Can somebody do it? Who was successful? Like doing like. See? Oh, am I doing it? Okay, that's the goal.
That's powerful. Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. There's something. The thing that I'm taking away from that is like it takes practice.
It does.
It takes reps, right?
Intentionality.
And it takes an environment where folks feel safe to be able to practice. And that's one thing I've observed too is it's sometimes awkward, right? Engaging in spaces where you don't feel fully equipped to understand the experience of others.
Yeah.
Right? I can't, over the last year and a half, how many times I've heard, oh, I just don't know the lived experience, or like I can't fully understand the lived experience of another person or another community.
I don't know the right term. I don't know what to say.
And we're so afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing versus leading with your heart, creating the connection, the savona, to where I know your intentions, I know what you're trying to do here, and I want to support your growth and create the environment for that. That's really powerful. Justin.
I love what you said about the safe haven, and that resonates a lot because we talk a lot about psychological safety and trust and how do we build connection. I personally do feel that when we're connecting with folks through Teams or whatever direct messaging, that there's a barrier of us really connecting, right? And I think now we communicate through email, we do Teams, we know that's expected, but it's really about getting with someone. And if that means in person, ideally, that's a nice thing to be able to do, but even coming on camera of just seeing me as my whole self, that I am an individual, I am unique, and these are my talents and gifts to offer to the team. I do think to your prompt around the future of what can we do for ourselves, and I know we were talking about this too, is as a coach, I'll tell my coachees to set aside time. So we block out time to eat lunch, right? Everyone needs a break to eat. So what would that unlock if we blocked out 30 minutes, ideally more, an hour a week, to just save that space to reflect, to truly reflect and think about how am I showing up for my peers, for my employees, but more importantly, for myself. And as we think about DEI work, it's ongoing, right? And when I'm with the folks here, every experience of ours is personal. Everything that has informed our lived experiences is different. But when we're able to connect and share those stories, that's where we build empathy and understanding, and we're able to build that trust. And as we get that safety of having an honest conversation, coming in this room together to really share openly, that's where I see benefits for businesses.
Yes, please.
Wow, what you talked about, just the reflection, the time to reflect, and how do I need to show up?
Yeah.
So there's the video on about Sawubona, and it's, Bishop Orlando is talking about his experience. But he says in this video, YouTube video, that Sawubona, it invites us and it challenges us to say, who do I need to be for you to be free? Right? So it's that reflection of who do I need to be in order for you to be free? Because it's not just about me, but as I see you, I want to invite you to be free and be your best self. So who do I need to be? That's so powerful. That reflection. Yeah.
Kelly, I want to get your thoughts, but something's coming up for me. We did not have a conversation about this, so it's a little, might be a little spicy, but I'm trying to think about, I'm thinking about a part of why I think folks are here too is you are trying to think about your strategies and ways to advocate in your workspaces. And when I put on my, I don't know, board hat or my CEO hat, I feel like over the last year and some change, also what we've seen is this like hyper focus on like bottom line performance, right? Let's just talk about impact, right? And I think in that narrative, and something got lost about the value proposition of creating positive, culturally forward work environments, right? And I think specifically, I'm talking about how do we have the conversation about the value proposition of allowing folks to engage in life outside of like their explicit job responsibilities, right? Or like the explicit things that are supposed to be a part of why they were hired, right? In the job description stuff. That's what I've seen too, is like employees are actively making decisions around, I want to go to this ERG event, but is this the best use of my time? Am I here just to like get my work done? Right. And like, scaling that out and all the touch points where a lot of the DEIB work that we talk about is about fostering this other thing. It's belonging, right? And cultivating that. But how do you quantify belonging in a way that feels like it will resonate for leadership?
Um, so I guess the short version of this answer is everyone's heard of Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. Did you all know that before he died, he had a whole new hierarchy because he had met, I want to say it was the Blackfoot tribe, and they institutionalized or operationalized really this whole other idea of how society could work, where it was very much based on interconnectivity. It was based on spirituality, or some of us may think of it as ethics or morals. And this is my shameless plug, you all. I built this this cultural framework for work where it actually includes this idea of what do you do to support employees in that way. So it can be some of the stuff we're already actually doing. So greener spaces. That's a connection with the environment, with the world around us. Putting in recycling bins, things that we may not consider because we're not being intentional. Those are things that we can actually use to progress. And because we can take this out of just the frame of, well, this is DI, this is about race. And I don't know if everyone's heard, but all of us are included when we talk about DEI, all of us. When we say belonging, it's not one type of person. It's actually literally all of us. So once we move that conversation into that space, it opens up all of these new alternatives. So instead of it being the tribe, they talked about religion or spirituality, we don't have to do that at work. We can say, hey, ethically, take an hour a month and donate some time to a cause or to an event. Some of the stuff, again, we're already doing, but not intentionally. When you put that plan together, what you start to see is a culture that not only allows you to live as a whole person, but encourages it. When you have leadership connected with that, where they say, oh, wait, what are you doing on an email after 5 o'clock on Friday? Go home. This isn't okay. When you have leadership that actually models that and supports that, it starts to change. Think about in your families. If there's a situation in your family where the dad is a drunk, I had a drunk dad. If your dad is a drunk, he comes and he drinks and he comes home, everyone in the family suffers from that. But when he turns his life around, everyone else in the family is impacted by that. That is the force of leadership. So those are the two things I would say. making it human and making the leaders live that first.
I think we've had conversations most recently too about
Yep.
what does DIB focus, and there's bucketing a lot in that,
Mhm.
but what does that look like as a performance expectation for leadership, right? And how do we actually make that live in a space where no one's going to balk at when you build your competencies and things like that. I would guarantee majority of the folks here, 90% of the things that are, maybe 85% of the things that are in director and above competencies are related to fostering
Mhm.
a positive work environment, things that related to the ideas and concepts of creating belonging, safe spaces, and things like that, right? But how are we actually holding folks accountable to that,
Mhm.
right? How is
Mhm.
that conversation coming into performance reviews for leaders, right?
Yep.
And where does that live, and how are we having those dialogue? I think it's also really powerful.
Definitely.
Well, I feel like if we're talking about vision setting and what does the future look like, we're gonna have to talk about DEIB and AI, right?
Uh-oh.
I think feels like it's a thing, right? It's a thing right now. I feel like it's a thing, and so I think some of the conversation, at least in this early stage of AI, when we talk about AI in context for DEIB, I think a lot of the conversation has been about mitigating bias, or like how do we make sure that we're thinking about the development of AI in a way that is supportive and conducive of DEIB practices and principles. But I'm also curious about like what are the opportunities that this new technology presents for DEI work going forward. Justin, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
I, excuse me, I personally am really interested in AI. I think what it is allowing me to do is to be curious and to wonder. Just curious, raise of hands, who has gone into any generative AI, ChatGPT? So that's fantastic, right? So when I think about where there are opportunities in the DEI space, we can engage in those prompts, those conversations that we're maybe not ready to have with the person. Because you have now this computer and you can ask and prompt these questions and just explore ideas. And I think that's really wonderful. You know, AI being the topic, a hot topic at the moment is what can it do? Will it replace jobs? And I think it's just another tool in our toolbox. And to generate ideas and to facilitate conversations, I think that's where it can be really powerful. Um, from a more technical standpoint around like HR tech stacks, like part of my responsibility is looking at different technologies that's coming. And when I look at talent development specifically, identifying skills and job roles and understanding where, you know, what career paths are possible for our employees, I love that. But I think we obviously have a responsibility of being informed, understanding what it can and cannot do, and just making sure that we're supporting our people correctly with navigating this new landscape. So even having this segment of just being able to talk about it right now, what it can do, I think is important around the conversation.
That's you, Regina.
Academy, we've been leaning into the AI space for well over a year with Conmigo, our teaching assistant, our tutor, and we're seeing how it's leveling the playing field for our learners and for teachers. So the Newark, New Jersey public school system, case in point, using Khan Academy and using Conmigo, and so you have students and learners who could not afford a tutor but now are able to get that tutoring assistant from Conmigo. So it really does level the playing field from an educational standpoint. Internally for HR, like Crystal created this AI for HR Slack channel so that we can explore how do we use AI to take away some of the administrative burden so that we can be more present, with our clients. It just helps us to lean more into those brave conversations and those safe spaces. One thing from a tactical standpoint, we're using AI to look at all of our employee engagement survey comments and then do a summary of those comments. Like, just instead of someone pouring over that by yourself and trying to pull salient comments out, there could be bias in that, right? So how do we use AI to summarize all those comments, give us the themes? So the power of using AI as a multiplier and to add more value is super powerful.
Using it in some really great ways. I had heard about the Conmigo.
Yes.
That is a beautiful tool. One of the other things I'll bring to light is that as a consultant, there is AI being developed to really do consultancy work as an addition, so not to replace. But one of the ways that they're doing that is to be able to have those conversations and have coachable tools to come back to you. So it's as simple as being able to say, is it okay to call someone this? Is it Latinx? Is it Latin? Like, and to really work through that in a considerable safe space. So that's another tool I've seen that's really helpful.
Well, I know we are right on. I'm
Yep.
burning into
Yes,
time
yes.
here. What I will say is, one, just if everyone can join me in thanking you all for this conversation.
Yep. Thank you all.
And if folks are excited and want to continue the conversation, we've all agreed we're gonna make our way out to the open space here. If you have any questions, things you want to dig in on, challenge some of the ideas that you've heard today, we'll be there and happy to have that conversation with you all. Thank you, everyone,
all.
physically, virtually, for attending.